The morning I woke up to find a certified letter taped to my front door was the morning everything went sideways with the HOA, specifically with Deborah Peterson, the self-appointed guardian of our neighborhood's supposed standards. I had just come back from clearing Mrs. Henderson's driveway 3 houses down because the elderly woman could not handle the 2 feet of snow that had dumped on our Connecticut suburb overnight. My snowplow attachment on my truck had been working overtime for the past 6 hours, and I was exhausted, cold, and ready for a hot shower when I saw that ominous envelope flapping in the winter wind. I ripped it open right there on my porch, my breath making clouds in the frigid air. The letter was from Deborah, written on official HOA letterhead, demanding I pay $3,000 for damages to her curb. She claimed my snowplow had destroyed the concrete edging along her property line during my morning plowing rounds. The letter threatened legal action, fines, and possible liens against my property if I did not comply within 10 business days. My name is Frank Emerson, and I have lived in the Meadowbrook Hills subdivision in Stamford, Connecticut, for 8 years. I bought my house back in 2017, a modest 3-bedroom colonial that needed some work but had good bones. I run a small landscaping business, and during winter months, I supplement my income by offering snow removal services to my neighbors. Most people appreciate it. Deborah Peterson was apparently not most people. I stood there reading the letter twice, then a third time, trying to make sense of her claims. I had plowed the main street this morning, sure, but I had been nowhere near her curb. In fact, I specifically remembered steering clear of her property because she had her silver Lexus SUV parked in the most inconvenient spot possible, right where the street curved near my driveway entrance. The vehicle had been sitting there for 3 days, ever since the snow started falling, and it had been blocking access to what I knew was my property's easement. I went inside, cranked up the heat, and made myself a strong pot of coffee. My hands were still shaking from the cold as I pulled out my property survey documents from my filing cabinet. I had reviewed these papers dozens of times over the years, especially when I was planning my driveway expansion back in 2019. The survey clearly showed that I had a 20-foot easement extending from my property line to allow for utility access and emergency vehicle entry. The exact spot where Deborah had parked her Lexus was smack in the middle of that easement. I grabbed my phone and took several photos of her car still sitting there, covered in a fresh layer of snow from the overnight storm. The timestamps would prove how long she had been encroaching on my easement. Then I pulled on my boots and winter coat and walked over to inspect the alleged curb damage she was claiming. The February cold bit at my face as I trudged through the snow. When I reached the area she described in her letter, I stopped and stared. The curb was indeed damaged. A chunk of concrete about 2 feet long had broken away and was lying in pieces in the snow. But here was the thing that made my blood boil even more than the false accusation. The damage was clearly old. The exposed concrete underneath was weathered and discolored, showing that this break had happened months ago, probably during the fall when we had that surprise early freeze. Fresh concrete damage would have shown clean, bright surfaces. This was anything but fresh. I took extensive photos from every angle, making sure to capture the weathering, the dirt accumulated in the cracks, and the way snow had packed into spaces that could only exist if the damage had been there before this snowstorm. Then I walked back to my property and documented the tire tracks from my plow, showing that I had stayed well within the street boundaries and had not veered anywhere close to her curb. My phone rang as I was heading back inside. It was my business partner, Tom, calling to check on the plowing schedule for our commercial clients. "Hey Frank, how is the residential area looking? We still need to hit the grocery store plaza by noon." "The neighborhood is clear except for the mess around my place," I said, stomping snow off my boots on my porch. "I've got a bigger problem, though. Deborah Peterson is trying to shake me down for $3,000 over curb damage I did not cause." Tom let out a low whistle. "The HOA board member. The one who tried to fine the Johnsons for having the wrong shade of white on their shutters. That is the one. Man, she is bad news. What are you going to do? Document everything and respond in writing. I am not paying a dime for something I did not do." After I got off the phone with Tom, I spent the next hour drafting a detailed response to Deborah's letter. I explained that I had photographic evidence showing the damage was pre-existing, that I had stayed within proper boundaries while plowing, and that her vehicle had been illegally parked on my easement for 3 days. I attached printouts of the relevant survey documents highlighting the easement and included timestamps on all my photos. I made copies of everything and sent the response via certified mail, just as she had done to me. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 2 days later, I received another letter, this time escalating the demand to $5,000. Deborah claimed that my response was defamatory, and that I was now also responsible for her legal fees for having to consult an attorney. She stated that the HOA board would be holding an emergency meeting to discuss my violations of community standards and potential suspension of my business activities within the neighborhood. This was getting out of hand fast. I called my lawyer, Gary Mitchell, whom I had used when setting up my LLC for the landscaping business. Gary listened to the whole story, asked me to email him all the documentation, and told me to sit tight while he reviewed everything. "Frank, from what you are telling me, she does not have a leg to stand on," Gary said, "but HOA disputes can get messy. They have certain powers under Connecticut law, and if she is on the board, she might try to leverage that position. Can she actually stop me from running my business?" "Not if you are operating legally, which you are, but she can make your life difficult with fines and restrictions. Let me look at your HOA covenants and see what we are dealing with." That evening, I was sitting in my living room reviewing my accounts when I heard a vehicle pull up outside. Through my window, I saw Deborah Peterson herself climbing out of a black Mercedes sedan. She was a woman in her mid-50s, with severely cut blonde hair and the kind of expression that suggested she smelled something unpleasant everywhere she went. She wore an expensive-looking wool coat and knee-high boots that were completely impractical for the icy conditions. She marched up to my door and knocked loudly. I took a deep breath, reminded myself to stay calm, and opened the door. "Mr. Emerson, we need to talk," she said without preamble. "I think we should communicate through our attorneys at this point, Mrs. Peterson. I am here as a courtesy to offer you one final chance to settle this matter before it goes to the board. $7,000 and we forget this whole thing happened." I blinked. 7,000. Your first letter said 3. The second said 5. Now you are at 7. What is next week? 10. Her face hardened. "Do not be flippant with me. You damaged HOA property and you will pay for repairs. The increasing amount reflects the time and energy I am having to spend on this matter. The curb is not HOA property. It is municipal property according to the town records, and I did not damage it. The damage is months old, as my photos clearly show. Your photos show nothing except your attempt to cover up your negligence. Mrs. Peterson, your car has been parked on my easement for 3 days. I have that documented too. You need to move it or I will have it towed." Her eyes went wide with indignation. "How dare you threaten me? That is public street parking." "No, it is not. It is on my property easement. I have the survey to prove it. I will have your business license revoked. I have friends on the town council. I am sure you do, but I have property rights and documentation. Please move your car by tomorrow morning, or I will take appropriate legal action. She stood there for a moment, her face turning an interesting shade of red, then spun on her heel and marched back to her Mercedes. She peeled out with more speed than was safe on the icy street, fishtailing slightly before gaining traction and disappearing around the corner. I closed the door and leaned against it, my heart pounding. I had never been good with confrontation, but I was not about to let someone bully me into paying thousands of dollars for damage I did not cause. The next morning, Deborah's Lexus was still parked on my easement, now with even more snow piled around it from the previous night's light dusting. I took more photos, then called the non-emergency police line to ask about my options for removing a vehicle from my property. The dispatcher connected me to Officer Raymond Hayes, who said he would stop by within the hour to assess the situation. True to his word, Officer Hayes pulled up in his patrol car 45 minutes later. He was a stocky man in his 40s with a no-nonsense demeanor. I showed him my property survey and pointed out the easement lines. He walked over to the Lexus, checked the registration sticker, and nodded. "Yeah, if this is your easement and you have the documentation, you have the right to have it towed," he said. "But I would recommend putting up some signs first, just to cover yourself. Give the owner 24 hours notice, post it on the vehicle and at the property line. If it is still here after that, call a tow company. The owner knows it is here. She has been parking here deliberately." Officer Hayes raised an eyebrow. "That complicate things." I filled him in on the dispute with Deborah. He listened, taking a few notes, then shook his head. "HOA disputes are civil matters mostly, but if someone is deliberately parking on your property after being informed, that could be considered trespassing. My advice: follow the proper notification procedures, keep everything documented, and let the courts sort out the rest." I thanked him and went to my garage to make signs. I printed out clear notices on bright orange paper, stating that the vehicle was parked on private property within my easement and needed to be removed within 24 hours, or it would be towed at the owner's expense. I laminated them to protect against the weather and attached them to the Lexus's windshield and driver's window, taking photos of each step. Then, I sent a text message to Deborah's phone number, which was listed in the HOA directory. "Your vehicle is parked on my property easement. You have 24 hours to move it before I have it towed. This is your final notice." Her response came within minutes. "You will regret this. The HOA board meets tonight and you will be held accountable for your actions." I forwarded the text exchange to my lawyer. Gary called me back that afternoon. "Frank, I have reviewed your HOA covenants. The good news is that they cannot prevent you from running your business from your property. The bad news is that the covenants do give the board broad authority to levy fines for what they determine to be violations of community standards. Deborah Peterson is vice president of the board, which means she has significant influence. Can they fine me for something I did not do? They can try. You would have the right to appeal and ultimately take it to court if necessary. But here is the thing. I dug into the property records for that curb area she is claiming you damaged. It is not HOA property. It is a public right-of-way maintained by the town. She has no authority to demand payment for damage to public property on behalf of the HOA. So she is just making this up. It appears she is either confused about the property boundaries or deliberately misrepresenting the situation. Either way, you are not liable to the HOA for that damage. If the town wanted to pursue it, that would be different, but based on your photos showing pre-existing damage, I doubt they would. What about the board meeting tonight? You have the right to attend and address the board if they are discussing your property or alleged violations. I recommend you go and present your documentation. Be calm, be professional, and stick to the facts. The HOA board meeting was held in the community center at the entrance to our subdivision, a small building that mostly sat empty except for these monthly gatherings and the occasional neighborhood event. I arrived at 7 that evening with a folder containing all my documentation, copies ready to distribute. The meeting room was set up with a long table at the front where the 5 board members sat. Deborah was there, of course, seated at the far right with a stack of papers in front of her. The president was Harold Chen, a retired accountant who had always seemed reasonable in past interactions. The other members were Janet Kowalski, Robert Morrison, and Susan Fletcher. About 15 other residents were scattered in the audience chairs. I recognized most of them, including Mrs. Henderson, whom I had helped with her driveway. She gave me an encouraging nod when I sat down. Harold called the meeting to order and went through the standard procedural items, approving last month's minutes and the treasurer's report. Then he reached the agenda item I was dreading. Next, we have a matter raised by Vice President Peterson regarding alleged property damage and easement disputes with Mr. Frank Emerson. Deborah, would you like to present your concerns? Deborah stood up, smoothing her blazer. Thank you, Mr. President. As many of you know, we experienced significant snowfall last week. During the snow removal process, Mr. Emerson, who operates a commercial snow plowing business from his residence, caused substantial damage to the curb along the property line adjacent to his driveway. This curb is part of our community's infrastructure and represents HOA property. The damage amounts to approximately $7,000 in repairs. Several residents murmured. I could not tell if they were sympathetic to her or skeptical. Furthermore, Deborah continued, when I attempted to address this matter with Mr. Emerson, he became hostile and threatened to have my vehicle towed. He has also made defamatory statements about me and has refused to take responsibility for his actions. I am asking the board to assess fines for the property damage and to consider restrictions on his commercial activities within the community. She sat down, looking satisfied with herself. Harold turned to me. Mr. Emerson, you are welcome to respond. I stood up, willing my voice to stay steady. Thank you. I have documentation I would like to share with the board and the residents here. I handed out copies of my photos, the property survey, and the timeline I had created. First, the curb in question is not HOA property. It is a public right-of-way maintained by the town of Stamford. I have included the property records showing this. Mrs. Peterson has no authority to demand payment on behalf of the HOA for damage to public property. I saw a few board members exchanging glances. Second, the damage she is claiming I caused is not new. These photos show significant weathering and discoloration consistent with damage that occurred months ago. You can see dirt and debris that could only accumulate over an extended period. I took these photos immediately after receiving Mrs. Peterson's first demand letter. I pulled up additional photos on my phone and passed it around so people could zoom in on the details. Third, my snowplow never came near this curb. I have photos showing my tire tracks stayed well within the street boundaries. The reason I avoided that area is because Mrs. Peterson's vehicle was parked directly in my path, specifically within my property's easement. I showed the survey highlighting the easement and the photos of the Lexus parked there. I notified Mrs. Peterson that her vehicle was on my property and asked her to move it. She refused. I followed proper legal procedures by posting notice and contacting the police. Officer Hayes of the Stamford PD came out and confirmed that the vehicle is indeed on my easement. Harold was studying the documents carefully. These property lines seem pretty clear, Deborah. Did you verify the easement boundaries before parking there? Deborah's face was flushed. The street is public parking. Mr. Emerson is manipulating the documents to avoid responsibility. I am not manipulating anything, I said. The survey is from the town records office. Anyone can verify it, and the easement is clearly marked on my original property deed. Janet Kowalski, one of the other board members, spoke up. Deborah, do we have any documentation showing that curb is HOA property? I thought all the street infrastructure was town-maintained. I have been on this board for 6 years, Deborah snapped. I think I know what is HOA property and what is not. But do we have documents? Janet persisted. The documents are irrelevant. The fact remains that his negligent plowing damaged our community. Actually, the documents are very relevant, Harold said quietly. Mr. Emerson, thank you for this information. I think the board needs to review this matter more carefully before taking any action. In the meantime, I do not see grounds for assessing fines or restricting your business activities. This is outrageous, Deborah said. He is clearly lying and you are taking his word over mine. I am taking the documentation at face value, Harold replied. If you have evidence that contradicts Mr. Emerson's survey and photos, please provide it at our next meeting. For now, this matter is tabled. Deborah gathered her papers with sharp, angry movements. You are making a serious mistake when the community sees the damage he has caused. If the damage is to town property, the town can pursue it, Harold interrupted. The HOA cannot assess fines for damage to property we do not own. The meeting moved on to other business, but I barely heard any of it. My heart was still pounding from the confrontation. When the meeting finally adjourned, several neighbors came up to me. Mrs. Henderson patted my arm. You did the right thing, Frank. I have seen that curb damage for months. It was there long before the snow. Another neighbor, Tim Rogers, who lived 2 streets over, shook my hand. Deborah has been a problem for years. Someone needed to stand up to her, but not everyone was supportive. A couple I did not know well left quickly, whispering to each other and shooting me disapproving looks. I realized this situation was dividing the neighborhood, and that made me uncomfortable. As I was leaving, Harold caught up with me in the parking lot. Mr. Emerson, do you have a moment? Of course. I want you to know that I will be looking into this matter thoroughly. Deborah has been making some decisions lately that concern me. If what you are saying is accurate, and the documentation certainly supports it, then she has overstepped her authority significantly. I appreciate that. I just want to live peacefully and run my business. I did not ask for any of this. Harold nodded. I understand. Keep documenting everything, and if she harasses you further, let me know immediately. When I got home that night, I found that Deborah's Lexus was gone from the easement. But in its place, she had put up a wooden sawhorse with a sign that read, "Reserved parking for 47 Meadowbrook Lane." That was her address. I took photos of this new development and sent them to Gary with a message. She moved the car but is now claiming the easement as her parking spot. Gary's response came quickly. Remove the sawhorse. It is on your property. Document that you are doing so and store it safely in case this goes to court. I went outside with my gloves and moved the sawhorse to my garage. The sign was clearly homemade, printed on her personal printer. I photographed it from every angle, making sure to capture the text and the address she had written. The next morning, I woke up to discover that Deborah had filed a police report claiming I had stolen her property. Officer Hayes called me to ask about the sawhorse. Yeah, I moved it because it was on my property, I explained. I have it in my garage. She can have it back anytime, but she cannot put it on my easement. Mr. Emerson, this is getting out of hand. Maybe you should consider getting a mediator involved. I am willing to mediate. But she is the one who keeps escalating. I will note that in my report. Just try to keep things civil, okay? Over the next week, things got worse. Deborah started a campaign in the neighborhood, going door to door with a petition demanding that the HOA ban commercial vehicle parking on residential streets. This was clearly aimed at me, since my landscaping truck was parked in my own driveway every night. The covenants did not prohibit commercial vehicles, but she was trying to get the rules changed. She also filed a complaint with the town's code enforcement office, claiming I was operating an illegal business from my home. That triggered an inspection, which I passed easily since I had all the proper permits and licenses. The inspector was apologetic, saying he got calls like this all the time from neighbors with personal disputes. Your operation is completely legal, Mr. Emerson. You are not doing any work on the property itself, just parking your truck here. That is allowed under the zoning for this area. But the harassment continued. Deborah began parking her Lexus back on the easement, moving it whenever I called for a tow truck, then returning it as soon as the tow truck left. It was a game of cat and mouse that was costing me time and money. My business was also suffering. 2 of my regular clients canceled their landscaping contracts, saying they did not want to be involved in neighborhood drama. I suspected Deborah had gotten to them, but I could not prove it. Gary advised me to file for a restraining order if the harassment continued, but I hesitated. That felt like a nuclear option, and I still hoped we could resolve this like adults. Then in early March, something happened that changed everything. I was driving home from a job site around 6 in the evening when I saw Deborah's Lexus parked on the easement again. But this time, there was something different. The back of the vehicle was sagging low, and as I got closer, I could see it was loaded with bags and boxes stacked so high they pressed against the rear window. Curious, I parked my truck in my driveway and walked over to get a better look. Through the windows, I could see the bags contained what looked like construction debris, chunks of concrete broken pieces of. Curb, my stomach dropped. I immediately called Gary. I think Deborah is planting evidence, I told him. Her car is loaded with broken concrete that looks like it is from that damaged curb. Do not touch anything, Gary said urgently. Take photos, but do not touch the vehicle. I am calling the police right now. I spent the next 20 minutes photographing the Lexus from every angle, making sure to capture the license plate and the visible concrete chunks. I also took video, narrating what I was seeing and noting the date and time. Officer Hayes arrived with another officer I did not recognize. Mr. Emerson, your attorney said there is a situation here. I explained what I had found. The officers walked around the vehicle, peering through the windows. That is definitely concrete debris, Officer Hayes said. Question is, where did it come from and why is it in her car? I think she is planning to dump it on my property and claim I was hiding evidence of the damage I supposedly caused, I said. The other officer, whose name tag read Martinez, radioed something to dispatch. We are going to knock on her door and ask some questions. Deborah answered on the third knock, and I could hear her raised voice from my driveway. This is harassment. I am filing a complaint against all of you. Madam, can you explain why your vehicle is loaded with concrete debris? Officer Hayes asked. That is none of your business. What I have in my car is my private property. Actually, madam, given the ongoing dispute with Mr. Emerson and his claims that you are making false accusations about property damage, We need to understand why you are transporting materials that appear to be from a damaged curb." There was a long silence. Then Deborah said something I could not hear clearly, and Officer Martinez radioed for backup. Over the next hour, more police arrived, including a supervisor and what appeared to be a detective. They brought Deborah outside to her vehicle and began removing the bags of concrete. They photographed each piece, documenting everything meticulously. I stayed on my property, watching from my porch. A few neighbors had come out, drawn by the police activity. Mrs. Henderson stood beside me. "What in heaven's name is going on?" she whispered. "I think Deborah was trying to frame me," I said quietly. The detective, a tall woman with sharp eyes, eventually came over to speak with me. She introduced herself as Detective Sarah Winters. "Mr. Emerson, I need to ask you some questions about your dispute with Mrs. Peterson." I told her everything, showing her all my documentation on my phone. She took notes and photos of my files, asking clarifying questions about the timeline. "Did you have any access to the damaged curb after you were informed of Mrs. Peterson's claims?" "Only to photograph it. I never touched or moved anything. All my photos have metadata showing the dates and times." Detective Winters nodded. "We are going to need to compare the concrete in Mrs. Peterson's vehicle with the curb damage. If it is a match, and if we can establish that she removed it from the town's right-of-way, she could be facing charges for evidence tampering and possibly filing a false police report." "She filed a police report about the curb damage." This was news to me. "Yes, about a week ago. She claimed you had destroyed town property and that the HOA wanted to press charges on behalf of the community." "The HOA has no authority over town property," I said, "and the board president told her that at the meeting. We will be looking into all of this. In the meantime, I would recommend you continue documenting any contact she has with you. If she is engaging in a pattern of harassment, that is something we take seriously." The police did not arrest Deborah that night, but they did impound her vehicle and its contents as evidence. I watched her face go pale when they told her she would need to arrange alternative transportation. She tried to argue, but the detective was firm. After the police left, I went inside and collapsed on my couch. The adrenaline was wearing off, and I felt exhausted. My phone buzzed with a text from Gary. "Talk to Detective Winters. This could actually work in your favor. Keep me updated." The next few days were quiet, eerily so. Deborah did not contact me, did not park on my easement, did not leave any angry notes. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she had hired a criminal defense attorney, which confirmed that the police investigation was serious. Harold Chen called me a week after the police incident. "Frank, I wanted to give you a heads up. The HOA board is meeting tomorrow night for an emergency session. We will be discussing Deborah's position on the board given the recent developments. Is she going to be there? She has been invited to speak if she chooses. But the board has some concerns about her conduct, particularly her claims that she was acting on behalf of the HOA when she apparently was not authorized to do so." The emergency board meeting drew a much larger crowd than the regular monthly meetings. The community center was packed with curious neighbors who had heard about the police investigation through various channels. I sat in the back, trying to be inconspicuous. Deborah arrived late, accompanied by her attorney, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit, who immediately started handing out papers to the board members. Harold called the meeting to order. "We are here tonight to address concerns about Vice President Peterson's recent actions and whether they represent conduct unbefitting a board member. Deborah, you have the floor if you would like to make a statement." Her attorney stood instead. "My client has been the victim of a vindictive neighbor who has manipulated evidence and misled the police. The charges being investigated are baseless, and we are confident they will be dropped. Any action taken by this board at this time would be premature and potentially grounds for a lawsuit. No one is talking about formal charges yet, Harold said calmly. But we do need to address the fact that Deborah made demands for payment on behalf of the HOA for damage to property the HOA does not own. She also filed police reports claiming HOA authority she did not have. That is a serious misrepresentation. My client was acting in good faith to protect the community's interests, the attorney replied. Janet Kowalski spoke up, but she was told specifically at the last meeting that the property in question was not HOA property. She filed her police report after that meeting. That is not good faith. That is deliberate. The discussion went back and forth for nearly an hour. Several residents spoke, some defending Deborah and claiming I was the problem, others supporting the board's concerns. Mrs. Henderson gave a passionate speech about how Deborah had bullied multiple residents over the years, and that this was just the latest example. Finally, Harold called for a vote on whether to remove Deborah from her position as vice president, pending the outcome of the police investigation. The vote was 3 in favor, 1 opposed, with Deborah abstaining. She was out. Deborah stood abruptly, her face contorted with rage. You will regret this, all of you. I will sue this board, I will sue Frank Emerson, and I will make sure everyone knows what a corrupt organization this has become. Her attorney tried to calm her down, but she shook him off and stormed out of the meeting. The room fell silent. Harold cleared his throat. Well, that was unfortunate, but I believe we made the right decision for the community. Now, let us move on to other business. 2 weeks later, I received a call from Detective Winters asking me to come to the police station to give a formal statement. I brought Gary with me. In a small interview room, Detective Winters laid out what they had discovered. The concrete in Deborah's vehicle did indeed match the damaged curb. More importantly, they had found video footage from a nearby home's security camera showing Deborah removing the concrete pieces from the curb location with a sledgehammer several days after her initial complaint to me. She was destroying evidence and planning to plant it to support her claims against you, Detective Winters explained. We also found emails on her laptop, which we obtained with a warrant, showing she had been coordinating with 2 of your former clients to cancel their contracts. She promised them HOA benefits like waived fees if they stopped using your services. That is extortion, Gary said. It is certainly something. We are also looking into her finances because we found some irregularities in the HOA accounts. It appears she may have been using HOA funds for personal expenses. That is a separate investigation being handled by the state's attorney office. My head was spinning. What had started as a false accusation about curb damage had uncovered what appeared to be a much larger pattern of misconduct. What happens now? I asked. We will be filing charges for evidence tampering, filing false police reports, and harassment. The state's attorney will decide about any additional charges related to the HOA financial issues. You may be called as a witness. Will I need to testify? Possibly. It depends on whether she pleads guilty or takes it to trial. Over the next month, the story became the talk of Stamford. Local news picked it up when formal charges were filed against Deborah. The headlines read, HOA Vice President charged with framing neighbor, and Meadowbrook Hills scandal exposes HOA corruption. The attention was uncomfortable, but it also vindicated me in the eyes of the community. Neighbors who had avoided me after the initial confrontation started waving again. My business began to recover as word spread that I had been the victim, not the perpetrator. The The state's attorney investigation discovered that Deborah had embezzled nearly $40,000 from HOA funds over 3 years, using a complex system of false invoices and inflated expense reports. She had apparently been living beyond her means, trying to maintain a lifestyle she could not afford, and had seen the HOA accounts as her personal piggy bank. When she realized the financial audit triggered by the police investigation would expose her theft, she had tried even harder to destroy my reputation and business, hoping the scandal about me would distract from her own crimes. The HOA held another election for the vice president position, and Janet Kowalski was voted in. She immediately implemented new financial controls and transparency measures. Harold Chen announced he would not seek re-election as president at the end of his term, saying the stress of the situation had taken too much out of him. In May, Deborah's case went to court. She had rejected several plea deals, apparently believing she could convince a jury that she was the real victim. Her attorney tried to paint me as a vindictive neighbor who had orchestrated an elaborate scheme to frame his client, but the evidence was overwhelming. I testified for 2 hours, walking the jury through the timeline of events and showing them all my documentation. The prosecutor presented the video footage of Deborah destroying the curb and loading the concrete into her car. They showed the emails about sabotaging my business and the forensic accounting evidence of the embezzlement. The trial lasted 5 days. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts: evidence tampering, filing false police reports, harassment, and embezzlement. At sentencing a month later, the judge was harsh. "Mrs. Peterson, you held a position of trust in your community, and you abused that trust in multiple ways. You attempted to destroy an innocent man's reputation and livelihood to cover your own crimes. You stole from your neighbors. You wasted law enforcement resources with false reports. This court takes such conduct seriously." She was sentenced to 4 years in prison and ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA and to me for my legal fees and lost business income. The total came to over $60,000. I sat in the courtroom gallery and watched her being led away in handcuffs, her face finally showing something other than anger. She looked small and defeated, and despite everything she had put me through, I felt a twinge of pity, but only a twinge. After the sentencing, several reporters tried to interview me outside the courthouse. I kept my comments brief. "I am just glad the truth came out. I never wanted any of this. I just wanted to live peacefully and run my business." That summer was the first summer in a year that I felt like I could breathe. My landscaping business was thriving again, busier than ever. Apparently, being the guy who stood up to a corrupt HOA board member was good for business. People respected that I had documented everything carefully and had not backed down when faced with false accusations. The new HOA board, led by Janet Kowalski after Harold stepped down as planned, implemented sweeping reforms. They created a transparency portal where all HOA finances were posted online for residents to review. They established a formal dispute resolution process that required evidence and documentation before any fines could be assessed. And they specifically amended the covenants to clarify what was and was not HOA property, making it clear that public rights of way like curbs and sidewalks were the town's responsibility. Mrs. Henderson still calls me first when she needs her driveway plowed. She baked me a strawberry rhubarb pie last week, saying it was a thank you for everything. "You did not just stand up for yourself, Frank. You stood up for all of us who were afraid to say anything when Deborah was being unreasonable." I think about that a lot. How many other people had Deborah bullied over the years? How many had paid fines they did not owe or changed their behavior to avoid her wrath? The financial audit suggested she had been abusing her position almost from the day she joined the board, and no one had challenged her because she seemed so confident and authoritative. My lawyer Gary tells me I am lucky the situation resolved as well as it did. A lot of these HOA disputes drag on for years and bankrupt people with legal fees. The fact that you documented everything from day one, that you stayed calm and professional, and that the police investigation uncovered her other crimes made all the difference. He is right, of course. If I had not kept meticulous records, if I had not taken photos of everything, if I had not known about my property easement and surveyed boundaries, things could have gone very differently. Deborah might have succeeded in extracting thousands of dollars from me for damage I did not cause. She might have gotten my business shut down through harassment and false complaints. She might have continued stealing from the HOA for years. Instead, she is in prison, and I am living my life. Last month, I got a letter from Deborah's attorney about the restitution payments. She is apparently trying to negotiate a reduced amount, claiming she cannot pay what the court ordered. Gary advised me to let the court handle it and not engage directly. I have also been approached by several other HOAs in the area, asking me to speak at their meetings about best practices for financial oversight and dispute resolution. Apparently, my case has become something of a cautionary tale in the community management world. I have declined most of these invitations, but I did speak at one meeting in Norwalk where they were dealing with similar issues. The most important thing is documentation, I told the room full of board members and residents. Do not rely on memory or assumptions. Get everything in writing, take photos, save emails, keep receipts. If someone makes an accusation, verify it before taking action. And remember that being on an HOA board does not give you unlimited power. You are governing a community, not ruling it. The questions went on for nearly an hour after my brief talk. People wanted to know everything, how I kept my cool when being harassed, whether I ever considered just paying Deborah to make her go away, what I would have done differently. The only thing I would have done differently is address the easement parking issue earlier, I said. I let her park there the first time because I did not think it was a big deal, but that gave her the impression she could use my property however she wanted. Sometimes you have to set boundaries immediately, even over small things, or people will keep pushing. That night, driving home from Norwalk, I thought about how much my life had changed in the past year. The stress and anxiety of the conflict with Deborah had been overwhelming at times. There were nights I could not sleep, days I second-guessed every decision. But I had learned a lot about myself too. I learned that I was stronger than I thought, that I could stand up to bullies, and that the truth really does matter. I also learned about the importance of community. The neighbors who supported me during the worst of it, people like Mrs. Henderson and Tim Rogers, they reminded me that most people are fundamentally decent. They want to do the right thing. They just need someone to go first, to show that it is possible to challenge wrongdoing without destroying yourself in the process. The Meadowbrook Hills subdivision feels different now. There is less tension, more friendliness. People actually attend the HOA meetings because they know their voices will be heard. The new board is focused on maintaining property values and community standards, but they are doing it with common sense and fairness instead of power trips and arbitrary rules. Janet Kowalski told me last week that several other board members from the old regime have quietly resigned, apparently worried that the forensic audit might uncover issues with their conduct too. She's been working hard to rebuild trust and establish the HOA as a positive force rather than a source of stress and conflict. "We should have done this years ago," she said over coffee at the local diner. We all knew Deborah was difficult, but we kept thinking she would mellow out or that someone else would deal with it. "I am ashamed we let it go on so long. You are fixing it now. That is what matters," she sighed. "I just keep thinking about how close we came to destroying an innocent person. If you had not had those property surveys, if you had not taken those photos, if you had not documented everything, we might have believed her. The HOA might have sided with her against you. But you did not. When I showed you the evidence, you listened. Eventually. But I did not speak up at that first meeting when my gut was telling me something was wrong. I let her intimidate me. I understood what she meant. Deborah had been very good at projecting authority and confidence, even when she was completely wrong. It took courage to challenge that, and not everyone has that courage in the moment. In September, I got an unexpected call from the town council. They wanted to thank me formally for exposing the issues with the curb damage and for helping them identify needed repairs throughout the neighborhood. Apparently, my photos of the pre-existing damage had prompted them to do a full survey of all the curbs and sidewalks in the area, and they had found numerous safety hazards that needed fixing. "Your documentation probably prevented someone from getting hurt," the town manager said. "We had several curbs that were damaged enough to be tripping hazards, and we had no idea because no one had reported them. They issued me a commendation at a town council meeting, which was embarrassing but also kind of nice. My mom, who lives in Florida, called me after seeing the news article about it online. She was proud, which made me feel like a kid again in the best way. I always told you that paying attention to details would serve you well," she said. "You got that from your father, you know. He was meticulous about everything. Dad had passed away 5 years ago, and I still missed him. He would have handled this situation the same way I did, with documentation and calm persistence. I wished he could have been there to see how it all turned out." As fall arrived and I started preparing my equipment for another winter of snow removal, I thought about whether I wanted to keep offering that service. The dispute with Deborah had started because of my plowing, after all. But I decided that letting her harassment change my business would be letting her win in a way. Besides, people in the neighborhood were counting on me. I did make one change, though. I invested in a dashcam system for my truck that would record everything while I was plowing. If anyone ever accused me of property damage again, I would have video proof of exactly where my plow went. Gary said it was a smart move, and my insurance company actually gave me a discount for having it. The first snow of the season came in late November, just a few inches but enough to test out my system. Everything worked perfectly, and I spent a peaceful morning clearing driveways and streets without any drama. When I finished, I came home to find a thermos of hot chocolate on my porch with a note from Mrs. Henderson. "Thank you for keeping us safe and mobile." Small gestures like that meant more to me than any commendation or news article. They reminded me why I did this work in the first place, to help my community and be a good neighbor. December brought heavier snows and more plowing work. I hired Tom's nephew to help me with the increased demand from new clients. Business was better than it had been in years. Apparently, word had spread beyond Stamford about the guy who documented everything, and several commercial properties in neighboring towns were reaching out for quotes. On Christmas Eve, I was finishing up some paperwork when there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find Harold Chen standing there with a wrapped package. "Merry Christmas, Frank. I wanted to thank you for everything you did this year." "I was just defending myself, Harold. You do not need to thank me." "But I do." You exposed problems that needed to be exposed, and you did it the right way. A lot of people would have lost their temper or handled it badly. You stayed professional even when Deborah was doing everything she could to destroy you. I invited him in for coffee, and we talked for over an hour about the neighborhood, the HOA, and how things had changed. He admitted that he had known something was off with Deborah for years but had not known how to address it. She was so convincing, he said. And she worked hard on HOA business, or so I thought. I did not realize she was working hard at covering up her theft. None of us saw it. She was good at hiding what she was doing. Still, I should have been more diligent. I was the president. I was responsible for oversight. I could see the guilt weighing on him. Harold, you are a volunteer on an HOA board. You are not a professional accountant or investigator. You did your best with the information you had. When the truth came out, you took appropriate action. That is all anyone can ask. He seemed comforted by that, and we parted on good terms. His gift turned out to be a beautiful set of drafting tools for making property plans, which was both thoughtful and practical for my business. As the year drew to a close, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. 12 months ago, I had been stressed, anxious, and facing the possibility of losing everything I had worked for because of one person's lies and manipulation. Now, I was thriving professionally, respected in my community, and at peace. The experience had taught me several important lessons. First, documentation is everything. Without my photos, surveys, and careful record keeping, I would have had no defense against Deborah's accusations. Second, standing up to bullies is necessary even when it is scary. If I had just paid her initial demand, she would have continued to abuse her power over me and others. Third, most people want to do the right thing if given the chance. The HOA board, the police, the neighbors, they all responded appropriately when presented with facts and evidence. I also learned that community matters more than I had realized. I had been somewhat of a loner since moving to Meadowbrook Hills, keeping to myself and focusing on work. The conflict with Deborah had forced me to engage more with my neighbors, and I had discovered that there were good people all around me who were willing to stand up and support what was right. In January, I attended my first HOA meeting of the new year. The attendance was better than ever, with nearly 30 residents showing up. Janet Kowalski presented the new budget, which had been carefully audited and reviewed by an independent accounting firm. Every line item was explained and justified. The transparency was refreshing. During the open forum portion of the meeting, a new resident stood up to ask about commercial vehicle parking, and I felt my stomach tighten. Was this going to start all over again? But the resident just wanted to know the rules because he was considering starting a home-based consulting business. Janet pulled up the relevant covenant sections on the projector and explained them clearly. No drama, no accusations, just information and civil discussion. After the meeting, the new resident came up to me. "You are Frank Emerson, right? I heard about what you went through last year." That is actually part of why I moved here. I figured if the community could clean house like that and come out stronger, it must be a pretty solid neighborhood. That perspective surprised me. I had assumed the scandal would hurt property values and make people avoid Meadowbrook Hills. Instead, some people saw it as evidence of a healthy community that could address problems effectively. Life settled into a comfortable routine after that. I ran my business, attended HOA meetings occasionally, and built friendships with neighbors I had barely known before. Mrs. Henderson invited me over for Sunday dinner once a month, and Tim Rogers and I started a tradition of watching football games together. In March, I received a letter from the state corrections system informing me that Deborah would be eligible for parole in 18 months. The letter asked if I wanted to submit a statement to the parole board. I thought about it for a long time before deciding not to write anything. She had been sentenced fairly, and I did not want to spend any more energy on her. She would serve her time, and hopefully, she would learn from her mistakes. The restitution payments started coming through, small amounts deducted from whatever money Deborah earned in prison jobs. It would take years for her to pay back what she owed, but that was not my problem. The court had handled it, and I was content to let the system work. My business continued to grow throughout the spring and summer. I hired 2 more employees and bought a second truck. We expanded into tree services and hardscaping, diversifying beyond just lawn care and seasonal work. The lessons I had learned about documentation and professionalism served me well in dealing with clients and managing the growth. In August, I was contacted by a local news station doing a follow-up story on the Deborah Peterson case 1 year after her sentencing. They wanted to interview me about how the situation had affected my life and business. I agreed to the interview, figuring it might help other people who were dealing with similar situations. The reporter asked good questions about how I had handled the stress, what advice I would give to others facing false accusations, and whether I had any regrets. "My only regret is not trusting my instincts sooner," I said. When Deborah first started parking on my easement, I knew it was wrong, but I did not want to cause conflict. I have learned that addressing small problems early prevents them from becoming big problems. Setting boundaries is not being difficult, it is being clear. The interview aired during the evening news and was posted online. I got several emails and calls from people thanking me for speaking out and sharing their own stories of HOA disputes and neighborhood conflicts. Some asked for advice, others just wanted to share their experiences. I tried to respond to everyone, offering what insights I could. One email particularly stuck with me. It was from a woman in California who had been fighting her HOA over false accusations for 3 years. She had been doing everything right, documenting and staying professional, but she was exhausted and considering giving up. "Your story gave me hope," she wrote. "It showed me that truth can win if you do not give up. Thank you for persevering and for sharing what you learned." I wrote back encouraging her to stay strong and to make sure she had good legal representation. I also suggested she reach out to local media if her HOA was acting inappropriately, as public scrutiny could sometimes motivate boards to behave more reasonably. As summer turned to fall, I realized I was genuinely happy for the first time in years. The business was successful, my relationships with neighbors were strong, and I had gained confidence in my ability to handle difficult situations. The experience with Deborah, as horrible as it had been at the time, had ultimately made me stronger and more connected to my community. The second winter after the incident was completely uneventful, exactly how I liked it. I plowed streets and driveways without any complaints or drama. My dashcam recorded everything, but I never needed the footage for anything other than my own peace of mind. The new HOA board focused on reasonable community maintenance and improvement projects, and people were generally satisfied. In February, I got a call from a documentary filmmaker who wanted to include my story in a project about HOA abuse and reform. I was hesitant at first, not wanting to relive the stress, but the filmmaker convinced me that sharing the story could help push for legislative reforms in how HOAs are regulated and overseen. I agreed to participate, and the filming took place over several days. They interviewed me, Janet Kowalski, Harold Chen, Mrs. Henderson, and several other neighbors. They also got statements from Detective Winters and my lawyer Gary about the legal aspects of the case. The documentary was set to premiere at a film festival in Austin in the spring, and I was invited to attend for a Q and a panel. I had never been to Texas, so I figured it would be a good opportunity to travel and see something new. Meanwhile, life in Meadowbrook Hills continued peacefully. The community had moved on from the scandal, though people still talked about it occasionally as a cautionary tale. Property values had actually increased slightly, despite my earlier fears, and several new families had moved in. The HOA had become something it was always supposed to be, a functional organization that maintained common areas, organized community events, and addressed legitimate concerns without abusing power or harassing residents. It was not exciting, but that was exactly the point. HOAs should be boring administrative necessities, not sources of drama and conflict. As I sit here now in my home office, looking out at the spring flowers blooming in my carefully maintained yard, I can hardly believe everything that happened. 2 years ago, I was fighting for my reputation, my business, and my peace of mind against someone who had abused her position, and trusted that her authority would protect her from consequences. The story could have ended very differently. I could have paid her initial demand and lived under her thumb forever. I could have lost my temper and done something that would have given her real ammunition against me. I could have given up when the harassment escalated and moved away, letting her win by forfeit. Instead, I stood my ground, documented everything, stayed professional, and trusted that the truth would prevail. It did, though not without cost. The stress of that time affected my health, my sleep, and my mental well-being. The legal fees were substantial even though I ultimately recovered them. The time spent dealing with the situation was time I could not spend building my business or enjoying my life. But I also gained things I would not trade. I gained confidence in myself and my ability to handle adversity. I gained real friendships with neighbors who might otherwise have remained friendly strangers. I gained knowledge about property law, HOA governance, and documentation practices that have served me well in business. And I gained a story that has apparently helped other people facing similar situations, which gives meaning to what I went through. The documentary premiered last month, and the response has been overwhelming. People from across the country have reached out to share their own HOA horror stories and to thank me for bringing attention to these issues. Several state legislatures are considering reform bills that would increase oversight of HOAs and make it easier for residents to challenge improper actions. I never wanted to be a poster child for HOA reform, but if my experience can help create positive change, then something good came from Deborah's attempt to destroy me. Last week, I ran into someone at the hardware store who recognized me from the documentary. We talked for a few minutes about his own struggles with his HOA, and I offered what advice I could. As we were parting, he said something that really resonated with me. "You know what the most important part of your story is? You showed that ordinary people can stand up to petty tyrants and win. You did not have special connections or unlimited money for lawyers. You just had the truth and the determination to prove it. That gives the rest of us hope." Maybe that is the real lesson here. Power, even the limited power of an HOA board position, can corrupt people who are not carefully watched and held accountable. But ordinary citizens, armed with documentation, persistence, and the willingness to stand up for what is right, can challenge that corruption successfully. The system worked in my case. The police investigated thoroughly. The courts held Deborah accountable. The HOA board, once presented with clear evidence, took appropriate action. These institutions are not perfect, and plenty of people face situations where the system fails them. But my story shows that the system can work if you engage with it properly and do not give up. I still live in the same house on the same street in Meadowbrook Hills. I still run my landscaping business and plow snow in the winter. I still attend HOA meetings occasionally and vote on community issues. The difference is that now I do all of this with confidence, knowing that I can handle whatever challenges come my way. Deborah Peterson is still in prison, serving her time for the crime she committed. I do not think about her often anymore. She is just part of my past, a chapter that is closed. I do not hate her or wish her ill. I just hope she uses her time to reflect on her choices and becomes a better person. As for me, I am focused on the future. My business is thriving, my community is healthy, and I am at peace. The snowplow that supposedly ruined Deborah's curb continues to serve the neighborhood well, clearing paths and making winter more manageable for my neighbors. The easement that she tried to claim as her parking spot remains clear and accessible, exactly as it should be. Sometimes I look at that spot, remembering the silver Lexus that started this whole mess, and I smile. Such a small thing, a car parked in the wrong place, led to such dramatic consequences. But that is how these things often work. Small boundary violations, left unchallenged, escalate into bigger problems. Deborah's parking was not really about parking. It was about testing whether she could take what was not hers and get away with it. When I challenged her, she escalated because she had been getting away with small violations for so long that she could not imagine being held accountable. The story of my conflict with Deborah is ultimately a story about boundaries, accountability, and the importance of documentation. It is about standing up for yourself when someone tries to take advantage. It is about community members supporting each other against bullies. And it is about institutions, police, courts, HOA boards, working as they should to protect the innocent and hold the guilty accountable. I am grateful for how it all turned out, even though I would not want to go through it again. The experience shaped me in ways I am still discovering. It taught me that I am stronger than I thought, that documentation is powerful, and that most people will do the right thing when given the chance. Now, when I see new residents moving into the neighborhood, I make a point to introduce myself and welcome them. I let them know that Meadowbrook Hills is a good place to live, with a functional HOA and friendly neighbors. If they seem interested, I share a bit of the history, the scandal that led to reforms and improved governance. Most appreciate knowing that the community has been through challenges and come out stronger. Life is good here now. The snow falls and I plow it. The grass grows and I cut it. The HOA meets and I sometimes attend. It is all beautifully, wonderfully ordinary. And after everything that happened, I have learned to appreciate ordinary. Drama and conflict make for interesting stories, but peace and stability make for a good life. My property boundaries are clear, well documented, and respected. My business reputation is strong. My relationships with neighbors are positive. The curb that supposedly started everything has been repaired by the town at no cost to anyone in the HOA. Deborah's fraudulent claims are a matter of public record, ensuring that no one will take similar accusations seriously without solid evidence. Justice was served, truth prevailed, and life goes on. That is really all anyone can ask for when dealing with conflict. The system is not perfect, but it worked in my case because I engaged with it properly and had the documentation to support my position. For anyone reading this who might be facing a similar situation with an HOA, a neighbor, or any authority figure making false accusations, my advice is simple. Document everything. Stay calm and professional, know your rights, get good legal advice, and do not give up on the truth. It may take time, it may be stressful, and it may cost money, but protecting your reputation and your rights is worth the fight. The easement that caused so much trouble remains an easement, legally defined and properly maintained. No one parks there anymore except occasionally for temporary access, always with my permission. That small strip of land represents something bigger now, a reminder that property rights matter, that documentation matters, and that standing up to bullies matters. I often wonder what would have happened if I had just paid Deborah's initial demand. Would she have come back for more? Would she have continued stealing from the HOA unchecked? Would other neighbors have suffered under her harassment? I like to think that by standing up to her, I not only protected myself, but also prevented future victims. The truth is that people like Deborah exist in communities everywhere. They seek positions of minor authority, and then abuse that authority for personal gain, or to satisfy some psychological need for control. The only way to stop them is for ordinary people to refuse to be bullied, to demand evidence and accountability, and to use the legal and institutional tools available to protect themselves. My story is one person's experience, but it reflects a larger pattern. HOA abuse is real and widespread. Thousands of homeowners across America face harassment, improper fines, and power-hungry board members every year. Some fight back and win, others pay up to avoid conflict, and still others lose their homes to foreclosure over disputes that never should have escalated that far. The reforms that have come from my case, the increased attention to HOA governance, the documentary, the legislative proposals are just small steps toward addressing a systemic problem. But small steps are better than no steps, and change has to start somewhere. As I write this final part of my story, another winter is ending and spring is arriving. The cycle continues, seasons change, grass will need cutting again soon, and life goes on in Meadowbrook Hills. The drama is over, replaced by the peaceful routine of community life as it should be. I have been asked many times if I regret buying a home in an HOA community. The answer is no. The problem was never the HOA itself, but rather one corrupt individual who abused her position. Now that she is gone and reforms are in place, the HOA functions as it should, maintaining common areas and protecting property values without overreach or harassment. Would I do anything differently if I could go back? Maybe I would have addressed the parking issue more firmly from the start. Maybe I would have researched Deborah's background on the board before the conflict escalated. But honestly, I did the best I could with the information I had at each step, and things worked out as well as could be expected. The certified letter that started this whole saga is now framed on my office wall, a reminder of how quickly things can go wrong and how important it is to stand your ground. Next to it is the commendation from the town council and a photo from the documentary premiere. They tell a complete story, from false accusation to vindication, from conflict to resolution. Every time I see that framed letter demanding $3,000 for damage I did not cause, I remember the fear and anger I felt opening it that cold February morning. And then I remember how I responded not with emotion but with documentation, not with anger but with facts, not by giving in but by standing firm. That is the person I discovered I could be, and that is worth more than any amount of money. The snowplow sits in my garage now, waiting for next winter. It is just a tool, a piece of equipment attached to my truck, but it represents my livelihood, my service to my community, and my right to operate my business without harassment. Deborah tried to use it as a weapon against me, claiming it destroyed her curb. Instead, Her false accusation destroyed her own life, while my plow continues to serve its intended purpose, clearing snow and helping neighbors. The easement is just a strip of land, legally defined property rights that most people never think about. But it became the battleground where I drew the line and refused to be pushed any further. Standing up for that easement meant standing up for my right to control my own property, to not be bullied, and to demand accountability from those who abuse authority. In the end, this story is not really about a snowplow or an easement or even about Deborah Peterson. It is about the importance of documentation, the courage to stand up for yourself, the value of community support, and the hope that truth and justice can prevail when ordinary people refuse to be intimidated. My name is Frank Emerson. I live in Meadowbrook Hills in Stamford, Connecticut, and this is my story. It is a story that began with a false accusation and ended with justice served. Along the way, I learned who I really am and what I am capable of when pushed to defend myself. I learned that community matters, that documentation is powerful, and that standing up to bullies, no matter how scary it seems in the moment, is always worth it. The story is finished now, the conflict resolved, the villain held accountable, and life returned to normal. But the lessons remain, shaping how I approach challenges and reminding me that ordinary people can accomplish extraordinary things when armed with truth, persistence, and proper documentation. That is something no false accusation or power-hungry board member can ever take away.